So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about how we can take advantage of the correction of error process. My name is Johnny Hanley. I'm a solutions architect for Amazon Web Services. I've been with Amazon for 8.5 years. I've been with the Cloud Optimization Success Team for the last 3.5 years. This talk was co-written by Juan Osa. He couldn't be here today, but we wouldn't be here without him, so I thought we'd go ahead and give him a shout out. So like Werner Vogels likes to say, everything fails all the time. So if you're going to have failures, you want to make sure that you're taking advantage of those failures for learning opportunities, right? We always want to improve, and this is one of the mechanisms we have to do that. But like Jeff Bezos likes to say, good intentions never work. So we need mechanisms to make anything happen. So what we're looking here, we need a mechanism to help us learn from our failures. And so that's what we have. The correction of error, that's what it is. It's a mechanism that's going to help us to identify and fix problems. It's going to help us drive ownership of action items, maximize lessons learned, and ultimately prevent the recurrence of the problem. It's really important to stress here that for this to work, we have to have a culture that doesn't include blame and it doesn't include punishment. And the reason this is because as people go through trying to find areas for improvement, oftentimes the people that have the knowledge you need to surface those areas for improvement are closest to the areas where things have happened. And so if they think they're going to be blamed, then they're not going to want to bring those areas for improvement forward. So it's really important that we have a culture of a safe space. All right, so why are we all here? Right? We're all at Inforce to talk about security. And we want to improve our posture, our security posture. And this is no different. So in the well-architected framework, and those who aren't familiar with the well-architected framework, it's a framework of best practices, and it's defined by 6 different pillars, one of which is security. In the security pillar of the well-architected framework, there's a best practice for the correction of errors process. That best practice also resides in the resiliency pillar, as well as the operational excellence pillar. So it's a motivational way to try to learn from our errors, learn from the failures, and try to continuously improve. One of the challenges with doing a COE is that as you're doing it, you have to take human capital. And people have to analyze what's happened and take that time and energy. And sometimes different people have different thresholds or different levels of consistency. It may be resources that you can't afford to spend. And so what we're talking about today is trying to utilize generative AI to make that a more efficient process, as well as less human intensive. So I want to frame this. We're talking about the art of the possible today, right? What can you do? This isn't completely finished. It's not something you want to take to production right now. You're going to have to test it in your environment. You're going to make sure that the prompting that we have done, and we'll talk about in a minute, carries over into your environment, and it sets the expectation for how you want your LLM to behave when it's communicating for your documents. Again, we're going to dive into all of that. So when we talk about correction of errors, there's a lot of resources out there on how to do correction of errors process. And for the purpose of today, we have 20 minutes. So I'm not going to go into all of that. I'll do enough so that everybody can follow along. But if you want more information, at the end, I'm going to post some QR codes for some blogs that were written about the correction of error process, as well as a reInvent presentation. Okay? And hopefully you'll recognize the people who wrote those. So going back to the anatomy of the COE, you've got supporting information, basically what happened, right? We start to talk about what it is that happened, and then we talk about what we can learn from that, right? What are the actions that we're going to take? What's the analysis that we've done? Because without improvements and without taking those actions, What's the point of gathering data points if you're not going to act on them? So I'm going to walk you through this in terms of human input, generative AI, and then some things that we're not going to discuss today. Because generative AI is a great tool, but it's a tool we want to use when it's appropriate, and there are some times when it's not the best fit. So we'll talk about that. So we're going to start with timeline. Timeline is what happened, right? The exact timeline of events, the facts of what happened during an outage. And then metrics, right? Metrics are things that we can capture that are going to show us those trends. For the purpose of today's talk, these are going to be human input items. In the future, you might be able to go ahead and capture those automatically, but for the purpose of the demo we did today, we're using those as input items. So here's some areas that we're going to utilize generative AI. Our summary, our executive summary, we're going to write that last because we need all the other data points in order to make it relevant. The impact statement, we're going to feed in the facts of what has gone wrong, but we're going to allow generative AI to go ahead and write that then in a conversational way. And then the 5 whys. I don't know if you're familiar with the correction of error process, but the 5 whys is something that allows us to not only look at the surface area of the obvious symptom that causes customer pain, but then to start looking at other ancillary causes that may have added to the problem. And so we can start to learn from other areas, because ultimately we're trying to maximize the learning that we can get from any and every incident. And then the action items. What are we going to do to improve based on the 5 whys that we have? Because if we're not going to take action, what is the point of going through the exercise to find all the data points if we're not going to make them actionable? And then the 2 areas that we're not going to address today that may or may not be areas for generative AI in the future. One is the incident questions, which allows us to break down the time to diagnose. So we want to figure out, how did we find out we had a problem? How do we diagnose what was wrong? And how did we mitigate that problem? Those 3 areas are the incident questions that help us to understand that and understand how we can then go about improving on those timelines. We're not going to discuss those today, though. All right, I'm going to give you a little bit of background. So what we have here is we have a Jupyter notebook that's running on a local machine. We're going to give you snippets of the Jupyter notebook, and I'll walk you through them. But then we're also going to have, we're making API calls to Amazon Bedrock. In particular, we're using Anthropic's Claude 3, and we're using Sonnet. Now, I'm not going to show the API calls for the brevity of the talk, but I wanted you to know that that's going on behind the scenes, and we're using Boto 3 SDKs for that. So here's a snippet from a Jupyter notebook. And basically what this is, you're looking at the actual facts of the incident, right? We talked about some of the things that are going to be human input, and this is one of them. Now, the way we're doing it for the purpose of this is we're capturing a variable called facts, and then we're adding the human input. Now, the reason we did it this way is because you can imagine if you had an application that might be abstracting the correction of error process from the end user. And maybe that front-end application is asking for a couple of things, asking for the facts of what happened and the timeline. And when we're going to capture those as variables, and then we're going to abstract the user from that. We're going to send API calls with that and the prompt engineering that we're going to show you to Amazon Bedrock, and then you'll see the output that comes out. And then you could pass that back along to the customer. So in this scenario, the facts are that there were 10,000 files that were processed, but they weren't successfully transformed. Customers received a message that their uploads were successful, but the data never made it to the application. And then it tells us the timeline of the event and when it was resolved. Another variable that we captured is timeline. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can see it's a running timeline of the log of events. Remember, when you do a correction of error process, you're doing it after you've already remediated the customer pain. As a result of that, you get to have the benefit of hindsight. So in here, we have a complete list of all the events that happened, some of which we didn't recognize the relevance of while the event was going on. But now that the event is over and we have the time, we go back and we find all the different points of reference. This is going to be important when we go through the rest of the documentation. We've put this into a variable called timeline. All right, so we're going to discuss some of the prompts we're doing here. And for those who may be new to generative AI, prompts are the way that we tell the large language model how we want it to behave. We give it context of how we want it to talk, of what kinds of behavior we want it to have, so that we get the kind of output that we expect. In this example, this is a prompt build-up for the entire document. We'll have others later on that are for specific sections of those documents. So for this one, we're capturing some more variables that we'll use later, but feeding in the different prompts we're going to use. For example, you will act as an IT executive. So we want this large language model to speak as if it's an executive. And we want it to maintain a professional tone. We're setting expectations for how it should communicate. Much like if you had a coworker join your team, you might give your coworker advice on how to talk to people in the company or how to talk to your boss. So we're giving that kind of context so we can understand how it should speak. And then you'll see there's a call here. It's saying, here's the timeline of the incident, and we're giving it the variable of timeline that we captured earlier with all those bullet points. And then we've got some more rules, some more prompt engineering, where we're saying you must avoid blaming and you must avoid punishing, and that this is going to be part of the incident report. So these are important things we're going to feed in, and it's going to keep that context going forward. Remember, I told you earlier that it was critical that there was no blame and no punishment in this process. So we're making sure that the large language model understands that and that it continues to behave the way we expect it to. And now we have the impact section. It's one of the sections I told you we were going to use generative AI for. And so we're going to set some prompt rules for this as well. We're going to tell it the answer should be concise. The answer should be a paragraph. You should include the impact analysis alone for this particular answer. And it shouldn't have more than 200 words. Now, as you glance at this, you might also recognize that there's typos sometimes in the prompts that we set. But that's okay. The LLM still understands, even with the typos, it understands the concept of what we're trying to say. And you'll see that in the prompt in a minute. So then the prompt below, we ask, create a business impact analysis for this. And then we provide the variable of the facts that we put in before, which gave basically the impact of what happened. And then we give it the prompt engineering variables that we just walked through. And this is the output that it gives you. I'm not going to walk through and read it, but it's essentially conversational communication following the guidelines that we said based on the stuff that we gave it in the customer pain section, right? When we told it what went wrong. It's written this in from the customer experience, the times that it started, all the information we gave it, and the generative AI spun it into a conversational tone with the parameters that we set. So let's move on to the 5 whys. 5 whys, for those who may not be familiar, it's a way to dive deeper into finding out more than just the obvious root cause, right? We talked a little bit about that before. It's important to know that we never told the LLM what the 5 whys was. All we told it was this. We're going to give it another rule and tell it to skip the preamble, right? We want it to get right to the point. And then we're asking it simply suggest a 5 whys root cause path for this. And we're providing it with the facts that we captured, that human input. And then we're giving it again the variables for the prompt engineering that we just walked through. And here's the output we get. Now, we never told it what 5 whys were. But you'll notice there's 5 numbers, right? 1 through 5. And if you read through this, it'll start with the first question, which is why we're over 10,000 files not successfully transformed. If you remember, that's the information we gave it in the beginning for the initial challenge, the initial problem. And then it answers its question of why that happened. And then in true 5 whys fashion, it goes in and asks the second question based on the answer to the first. And then it answers its own second question, and it goes to the third. And this is the way we get much deeper in opportunities for improvement. We didn't feed it all the information all the way down to the fifth. It's generated that based on what we gave it for information and what it knows about the 5 whys process. Now, a little bit of an interesting tidbit. When we were first starting this process, Juan and I were going through and we were trying to figure out how did it know so much about the 5 whys? I mean, it was fascinating. And so we asked it in the beginning to give us the sources of the information it was looking at. And it turns out that one of the blogs we wrote, which I'm going to show you the QR code for later, we talked about the blogs that tell you about this in more depth, was referenced by the LLM. So it's getting all this information from information that's already out there to get its context. But we didn't specifically tell it this here. And you'll notice we didn't give it any examples. When you're doing prompt engineering, they have the concept of, they call them shots. But basically they're examples. And you can give examples of how you want the format to come out. And it really helps to lend towards the context and give you the format of what you're looking for. In this scenario, we didn't give it any examples. So this is a 0-shot model. We're going to move on to the action items, right? So we've now figured out the 5 whys. We need to look at what actions we come from there. So we're telling it again with prompt engineering to skip the preamble and get to the point. We're telling it should provide a list of actions. It should focus on the application. It should be smart. If you don't know what smart is, it's a reference to a way to write goals, right? Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Again, we didn't tell it what smart was. It already figured it out. And then limiting it to the 3 most impactful items, and again, skip the preamble, and we gave it the prompts. Well, this is a lot here, and for the purpose of what you're doing, you may not want this much output. And you can formulate that with your prompts. But you'll notice, it's interesting, there are 3 things, if you look at 1, 2, and 3, just like we asked it, these are action items that came up with based on the 5 whys of all the things that went wrong. All of that is feeding its own output back into itself and coming out with more output. Now you'll also notice it went through and it explained exactly why it thinks that each of these is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So it's pretty awesome that it's going to that depth. Again, with some examples, you can formulate this a lot better into exactly what you want for your output, or you can tell it not to spell out exactly why they're smart criteria, and it will change that. For the purpose of today, we didn't go into that much depth, but it's just a proof of concept. Now, the last step here is the summary section. We said we were going to do it last because we need all the information. So what we've told it here for prompt rules, be concise. Limit your answer to 200 words. Remember, this is for an executive summary. And skip the preamble. Get right to the point. And then we fed it some variables, right? We said summarize the request based on the facts and the timeline, which are 2 human input variables. And then we have the impact statement that was generated from the generative AI. We feed that back in. And then we have the output from the 5 whys, which was also generated from generative AI. And then we give it the prompt engineering that we asked for, and it goes ahead and it gives us this, which is an excellent example of exactly what happened, starting with the statement of what went wrong, and then talking about some of the remediation steps, the timelines, and ultimately even adding in some of the action items that were generated by the generative AI. So you can see that it's summarized all the things that it's gotten, both from humans as well as from the artificial intelligence. So now what we're going to do a little exercise in human prompt engineering, right? So I'd like to say to you guys that great presentations deserve 5 stars. And then I'm going to ask you to please fill out your surveys. As promised, here are the QR codes for the references. So we have a blog on why you should develop the correction of errors process. We have another blog at the bottom right on creating the correction of errors document. And then we have a reInvent talk from 2022 all about diving into the correction of errors process. So if this is a topic you're interested in, please dive into this, see exactly why and how you should do it. And hopefully what you've seen today from the generative AI integration with this will make it a lot more efficient and create a baseline for how to go forward in making this less human interaction and more consistency. I want to thank you very much, and I really appreciate your time.